Good afternoon, Frank.
Professor Spooner.
I think probably the way to start this session off is to say that probably we've come to the end of the age of empires, which began in the probably in the third millennium BCE and has continued in one way or another ever since, and maybe have reached its peak in around 100 years ago, with the sun never setting on the British Empire. And then gradually in the second half of the 20th century, people started talking about America's position in the world as an American empire.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems at the moment as though every country that wants to exert hegemony beyond its borders, let alone domination, is running into problems. And so one thing that we've talked about a lot in these sessions before is the way the organization of society is changing, and generally organization is becoming a bigger and bigger problem as more and more people have to be in interaction with each other in a globalizing world with an accelerating, well, no longer accelerating, but continuing population growth. What stands out in the news in the last few days is the problems that nation states are having, and especially the ones that thought they were particularly important, of managing their relationships. I think well, I'm not sure which is the best place to start, but our current president, Donald Trump, suffered another setback from the judiciary last night. He's desperately trying to manage immigration into this country, which the judiciary tells him is against the Constitution. And since this country has to be run according to a text that was written 200 years ago, he has to pay attention to that, even though he's trying to say that it's judiciary overreach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. Another thing is the problems of Brexit, because Article 50 was triggered. That's the word. Yes, I'm not sure whether that's the
legal word. No,
the word that's used in Brussels, but
no.
Triggered yesterday, and immediately got a response that it was blackmail. That Mrs. May was trying to say that if the European Union wasn't careful, it was going to suffer more than England from the divorce, and that they should stop trying to think that they can do as they wish in terms of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then I noticed the Financial Times was saying that the Chinese want to do in the South China Sea is really, when it comes down to it, no different from what America does around its coasts. Not that America is building islands, but America's biggest interest in the South China Sea is access for intelligence.
Yeah.
And if the Chinese tried to do the same sorts of things around the coast of America as America thinks it has a right to do in the South China Sea, America would get very upset. So I thought it was very interesting that should finally be published. At least I've never seen it published before.
Well, that was always one of the big values of Cuba to the Soviet Union, acting as a listening post.
Yeah, exactly. And the same problem is going on now around Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Europe is playing as big a role in this as the U.S. And I think it's Merkel gets an extremely good press for everything she does. It's as though if she does it, it's okay, and if other people do it, it's not. But I think that maybe it's possible that she's influenced somewhat by her history growing up and living most of her life in East Germany. Well, probably not most of her life now, but a major part of her life.
Right.
But she is leads the opposition in Europe against Russia's interest in its surrounding areas, most of which were in fact part of the Russian Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously she's supported by the US. So what I'm suggesting is that we're entering a new age of international relations in which the problems are somewhat different from what they have been for most of the last 50 years. And it's a period, probably going to be a period of some considerable uncertainty in the next few days.
I think there's going to be quite a bit of uncertainty, and I think some of it at least stems from an inability of the institutions to deal with the rapidity of social change. Right? And we've often talked about this, but you mentioned a couple of things that, in my opinion, are unfolding, despite the fact that right now, at this second, on the 30th of March, if you were to take votes, telephone or electronic or internet votes to get the true pulse of the people, the majority of the people in Britain would say, wait a minute, we are not ready for this kind of a hard Brexit. The majority of people in the United States would disavow the Trump agenda. But simply because of the fact elections were held according to a text, according to procedures, the populations are stuck with the results. That's it. There's no way around it until the prescribed period elapses. And that's something that I understand that's the law. I understand that's the way it always has been, but that does not fit the way people live today. It's discordant. It doesn't quite fit. And I think that this is going to become an increasing problem.
It's a problem of democracy. That is, democracy is based on an institutionalized set of institutionalized procedures, and because of the degree of social change in the last few decades, those procedures are going to have to be changed, and it's going to be very difficult to change them because institutions are very difficult to change because so many people have to agree to actual details. I'm afraid that what's going to happen as far as Brexit is concerned is that Theresa May will manage to get a deal that she and her cabinet agree to, and then it will have to go to the House of Commons for approval, and they won't accept it. Or there'll be an election, and the people won't accept it. I think...
Yeah, and I mean, and let me interrupt you, but that's a fast track positive result compared to what the United States faces. We have to sit this out for 4 more years. I mean, I don't mean to cast political aspersions one way or the other, but if the majority of the people in the country, as polls seem to indicate, are repelled by what the administration is doing in Washington, there's nothing that can be done about that until January of 2021.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, the next big event is on April 5th, which is in fact that's before we meet next week. So we'll be able to talk about this next week. Is the meeting finally between President Xi and President Trump,
which will of course take place on a golf course.
And I don't know whether President Xi plays golf or not, but that whether that will be an added complication. But that's the first meeting between leaders of the main hegemonizing modern states for some time, and it's interesting that it's between the two that one would think would be least likely to agree.
One would think, yes, yeah. It's interesting because the Trump has met with a smattering of world leaders, and today he met with the Prime Minister of Denmark, for example, and then of course he's met with Merkel, he's met with May, but this is definitely going to be a big one. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm sure that the Chinese are well prepared for this. I'm not so sure the Americans are, though.
It's going to be interesting to see whether they shake hands.
Oh, they'll shake hands. They'll shake hands. Yeah.
And how long the handshake lasts.
Right. No, I don't, we've talked about this often, about the rapidity of social change, but this is beginning to become a real problem, I think, for democratic institutions, because you need to be able to respond. The governments, the institutions have to be able to respond to the people. And I think that in the United States, we are 1/24th of the way through Trump's term. Look at the pressure that is building already. I don't know quite how this is going to resolve itself, but it's not going to be pretty.
Well, that's the big advantage of the so-called British Constitution.
Yes, it
is. Things can be done in a new way at any time if everybody agrees.
Mm-hmm.
And the only guide to what's to be accepted and what's not to be accepted is what's been accepted in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I think that probably America is least well prepared for that sort of thing because of how sacred the Constitution is. The Islamic world, of course, is the least prepared, and it's going to be interesting to see. I think that China probably works much better simply because there is so much authority vested in the hands of the president. And there is much more popular participation in what actually gets decided in China than most people think there is, simply because the participation is less obviously institutionalized.
Mm-hmm. There is a level of responsiveness there that many people are not aware of. You're correct.
Yeah. And since all of these countries are going through a period of increasing urbanization, and I think that has been more intense or intensive in China than anywhere else.
Yes.
I think figures now for how many cities there are in China above a certain size, but it's really quite amazing what's happened. And that, of course, has completely changed the way public opinion develops, circulates, and gets attention.
Well, it's going to be very interesting because when the Chinese and the Americans meet, they're going to have they should have relatively similar goals in order to keep the peace on a big level, and then allow free trade so growth can occur. But I don't necessarily know if that's how it's going to unfold. I think there's going to be a pretty strident tone from Washington on the Chinese actions in the South China Sea. And I think that once that cat is out of the bag, I think the Chinese are going to accuse the United States of walking away from climate change, walking away from free trade, and it could develop into a real Donnybrook.
Well, I listened to a lecture last night by the person who established environmental studies at Penn and is a big global warming skeptic. And very interesting detail about the fact that climate change is something that's been in progress for a long time. We can't do anything about it. It's possible that a lot of things we do have an effect on it, but if we stop doing those things, we'll save some of our resources, but it won't stop the climate changing. The details of just exactly what is changing the climate are amazingly complex.
They are. Well, that could be a good note to end on, and then maybe we can investigate some of those details next when we get a clearer view as to how the United States is no longer going to pay attention to them.
Yeah, but just one other thing I would like to finish on, which is that more and more you see trade in the headlines, both in the discussion of the South China Sea and in the discussion of the UK leaving the EU.
Yes.
And most of these issues, people are realizing that the more important than anything else is trade, which actually is the main factor behind globalization from the beginning, and what we need more than anything else to produce a working global community. So
that's really where globalization began, right? The first group of people from one village walked to the next village to do some exchanging. Yeah. All right,
okay.
Professor, thank you very much. Okay.